Hello, Bob. Welcome this evening. What an incredible honor to have a scholarship named, in your name, to go to an independent bookseller that wants to pursue a life in journalism or the creative pursuit of letters. An extraordinary tradition.
Well, I certainly feel privileged and very grateful to Q. He's been working with him all these years. Has been a pleasure and a wonderful learning experience. Yeah.
Same for me as well. I've only been here for a little over a year, and it's just been a whirlwind of coming into contact with folks like you and everyone that we are a part of this wonderful project together. Kpfa has gone on for more than 72 years as the first community-funded radio station, and that the community spirit, I think, is something that really resonates very strongly in the reason that we're here this evening, and that's to celebrate the release of Wild Green Oranges, the community spirit of the Cuban Revolution, the community spirit that for some reason drew you from New York, the cosmopolitan area, to the wilds of an archipelago that was fighting for something very special. And so I want to just dive right in, Bob, because our time is precious and you've accomplished so much with Wild Green Oranges. Let's just figure out for a moment what attracted you to Cuba. Tell us a little bit about the scenario that drew you to take arms and fight for a revolution.
Well, I was in New York at a time, well, you know how many years ago, almost 60 some years ago, when news reels were shown when you went to movie theaters. And I saw a news reel almost inadvertently about Fidel Castro and the movement, the 26th of July Movimiento. It moved me tremendously. And within a few days, I was with a friend who spoke Spanish, which I did not. I was on my way to Cuba. And I guess that's the way to say it. We managed to get our way all the way down this country, and then hitchhiking and other methods of public transportation, got down through Cuba into the Sierra Maestra and climbed up into it, and in time met and joined Fidel Castro's 26 de Julio Movimiento.
Yeah, incredible. I've had the opportunity to spend a little bit of time in the island as well, and I know that hitchhiking and travel, cumbersome travel, a very uncomfortable travel, is sort of a way of living there. So it sounds like you had quite a, the training, the pre-combat training of getting from New York to, I guess it was Miami, and then over to Cuba to then begin your long process from Havana to the Sierra Maestra. It was a very challenging trip for you.
Well, I've got a segment here I might offer to read about the public transport going down. This
Please
is
do.
a book, Wild Green Oranges. The train seats were worn wooden ones in an overcrowded car full of poor country people, campesinos, and their animals, which littered the aisle, filled seats, stuffed the overhead baggage racks, roosters in crude wooden crates, baby pigs stuffed into hampers or held tightly in laps, noisy chickens galore, and irate geese with their bodies tied into canvas sacks. This astonished me. Griffin wasn't fazed. We were under the sullen surveillance of soldiers with machine guns, one posted in front of the car, one in the rear. There was almost nothing to be seen in the dense blackness outside the windows, although most of the campesinos stayed awake, looking out, their mouths clamped shut. I didn't want to stare, yet it was impossible not to notice how undernourished and grim they were, their faces pinched with overwork, often pocked with disease. So many were physically damaged, even the youngest of them. Some had bare feet streaked with filth, mottled with sores. the jerky motion of the train had their bodies jiggling like so much abject gristle, while their animals kept up a wild barnyard clamor. The car soon reeked of urine and the overpowering stench of the animals. The car was soon overheated and there were no open windows. Griffin leaned his head against my shoulder and simply went to sleep. When I kept studying the faces around us, at last the train screeched to a stop. A solitary light bulb revealed a dark station house, and on it the word Matanzas.
Beautifully powerful. The writing contained within Wild Green Oranges is extraordinarily accomplished. First and foremost, this is a riveting book that to me feels like belongs in every backpack that exists within every traveler on this planet. It's a universal story. It's a story that coming of age, but then going towards some grand adventure. It's a beautiful book and it reads so wonderfully.
Thank you.
You experienced what you did. You went to Cuba under the, I guess it's the auspices of journalism. This was not something that I guess you guys, and your pal who spoke Spanish, you did not. He says, "Oh, I'll take care of all of this." What, you just kind of got a bug, and you wanted to go, and you said, "I just want to go dip a toe into what it's like over there, experience this moment." It felt like a moment in history for you. It felt like a place that you needed to be, and then as a reader within Wild Green Oranges, it felt like the moment took control of you. Did you feel like you went with one thing in mind and then?
That's well said. I did go with the journalistic aspirations. I really wanted to be a foreign correspondent, and that vanished after a while there. Once I was there with the movement in the mountains in the Sierra, it was obvious to me that Fidel really needed warriors. He needed combatants. He needed fighters. And I volunteered and was accepted. I had training at college at that day and age. It was mandatory when you were in college to undertake ROTC, Reserve Officer Training, which gave me familiarity with at least with an M1 rifle, how to field strip it, how to use it. And so I came with some knowledge and some training. Yeah, and I did volunteer.
And so I remember a wonderful conversation between yourself and Fidel in the book when he was asking you about, was it Fidel asking you about your familiarity with weapons? And certainly after a very dramatic, the troop received a bunch of weapons, including an automatic machine gun, that you and Fidel went off into the woods. And he kind of wasted a lot of, well, maybe not wasted. I think he was trying out the new weapon.
Yeah.
But maybe they should have saved that ammunition for a little bit more.
Yeah. Fidel loved that weapon.
Yeah. It was a very, very, a funny interaction between yourself and Fidel, between then Fidel and everyone else that came, around after that, shooting up the trees and getting all of the, he was just testing out the rifle, but to everyone who hasn't read this, they should not have been utilizing that ammunition for shooting leaves off of trees, I suppose. So it was
could have been more wisely utilized. Yes,
rather tongue in cheek when he came back. There seemed like just a wonderful joy in the midst of all of the hard times that you were all involved in there. That there was a levity that Fidel offered, a great companionship and an inspiration and joy in what they were doing. How was that experience for you? How easy was it to fall under that sway?
It wasn't difficult at all. He had a kind of boyish zaniness that always appealed to me and that I could coexist with very readily. Other more serious of the combatants sometimes got a little annoyed at it, but I never did. I always admired him.
And so that, oh, of course, and that was a very important part of that that aspect of that time for you. I'm sure you were the only North American to fight alongside Fidel and with those the rebels in the jungle, and you did see actual physical combat. You fired and were fired upon, and your friend, your colleague that you came with, did not take that same journey with you. That's a very important to me aspect of the book, that there was this separation between yourself and your companion that you came to Cuba. Do you feel that he was there for you as a supporter of everything, or was he along for kicks?
Not of everything. He tried very earnestly to dissuade me from fighting. He did not want to fight. He felt it was not, so to speak, our fight, our struggle. I felt differently. So we had that very central argument all the time. In another sense, he was there for me. He stayed and, in fact, managed to help me get, when I became quite ill, managed to help me get down out of the mountains and back to the United States. That was incredibly difficult and very dangerous. And he did all of that.
Well, he also was instrumental in getting you to the point of contact initially. There was a beautiful moment of you two coming into town and you having to sit in under the omnipresent glare of the sun, getting sunburnt while you're waiting for him to go make a contact to get you the path through the woods, you know, into the mountains, into the foothills, and to make that contact. That he was really instrumental from the get-go as well. And you wrote very eloquently about this on the bus trip. If you'd like to share a little bit more of your writing with us on the way across the island from your initial contact, where you were strip searched. And
I can try a little bit here. We'll see about, we were strip searched early on in Cuba, and I'll take it from there. Our clothes went on much faster than they'd come off. I could hear the pre-dawn cries of birds. The sawhorses had been dragged off to the sides of the road, and the jeep load of soldiers was gone. The bus was sitting in the middle of the road. It must have been at least an hour later when I awoke to find the bus plowing with difficulty through a massive expanse of brown water stretched across the highway and into the fields on each side. The bus got through the flooded area and was picking up speed when I saw an explosive flurry of dark birds, crows or ravens, flapping wildly around a telephone pole next to the highway. Perhaps a dozen of them in midair were tearing off bits of flesh from the remains of a naked human body hanging on the pole about 8 feet off the ground. I shook Griffin awake, but by the time he was sufficiently roused, we were past it. Maybe 10 miles later, there was a similar scene that we both noticed at the same time. This one was clearly a young woman with long black hair without clothes. She had a horribly twisted neck. She was wired to a utility pole. It looked as though small animals or large insects had eaten at her legs nearly to the waist. It was sickening. Like a crucifixion, I said, deeply shocked. A warning, Griffin said, grimly. Warning? Those were captured rebels? Could be, he said, or sympathizers. You know. like us. Our tickets are only one way, right? Right. We fell silent, preoccupied with our own thoughts, still intently scanning both sides of the highway. I was trying to dispel a kind of heavy fear centered in my chest, as though it was suddenly full of wet clay. Maybe it was only the bruise from the rifle butt in my chest, but my whole body had taken on a weighty numbness I couldn't remember ever feeling before, a profound dread.
Yeah, this is no joke. I mean, you're coming into this a stranger in a strange land, the two
Exactly.
of you.
Well said.
And you really, you have the merest whisper of a trajectory, of a roadmap. I remember very vividly from the book, Where's the Path? You walked for hours through the mountains and you're getting exhausted. You've got blisters on your feet and you say, isn't there supposed to be a path coming from this one, we've only been walking for 2.5 hours. It'll be here anytime now. This was really an extraordinary thing to find yourself dropped in the middle of, and you just wanted to maybe interview the man. You just thought, oh, well, what's all this about? But here you find yourself in this Boschian landscape, and
it's a good, way to say it. Here's a little section of her. When we finally got to Bayamo, which is most of the way down the length of the island, I wrote, Bayamo was exactly the sort of town I'd expected to find in Cuba. Street after unpaved street of open stalls with throngs of people and panting dogs, bicycle riders and donkeys. There were groups of soldiers as well, all carrying rifles, evidently on informal patrol, ambling and observing, not bothering anybody. Near the center of town, we were borne along with the crowd of shoppers, past stall after stall of fruits and vegetables, most of them exotic, unknown to me. There were table loads of fish melting on ice, dripping carcasses of skinned pigs, whole cows hanging upside down. One table had large, headless turtles lying in their own blood, fat black flies, small green flies, and various bees buzzed in swarms over all the ripe fruit and displays of meat. Although the food was extravagantly abundant, very little of it was being bought. For all the vociferous quarreling over prices, most of the customers I saw seemed to be haggling over the smallest of quantities. Only flies and the more aggressive dogs were feasting. Conversation was impossible in that pandemonium. I hoped in all the commotion we didn't stand out. We strolled on, dodging burros hitched between stands, avoiding their plentiful droppings. Finally, we found ourselves standing in front of the Café Bayamo, where that clerk's cousin might be a contact for us. The place was crowded with military, not at all what we expected. When we stepped in, a number of the soldiers turned to look at us. Griffin didn't pause, but walked straight across the single room and asked the proprietor if we could buy a bottle of water. The proprietor said no, but told us he could have water for free at a fountain in the park. Did you ask her, Miguel? I said, when we were back on the street. That didn't seem like much of a good move. You could see the place was crawling with soldiers.
Yeah, and everybody had ears open, didn't they?
They did. Everybody did.
Yeah. So you found, you saw extraordinary, the horrors of war and what could happen to people who resisted the Batista regime. And then later you took prisoners. You were involved in combat. It's an autobiographical novel, but you write of taking lives for this revolution, and taking prisoners. How do you feel the contrast between the treatment of prisoners? I mean, you were also treated extremely well, gloriously. What little that everyone had to share with you on your journey to find Fidel, they shared with you and they shared with Fidel. The snakes, you know, the scraps of food, everything that they could, they gave to the cause.
Well, Fidel maintained a prison camp for prisoners that we caught. We would take them, and they were all kept in one very large room, one big hut, a bohio, and we would take away their weapons, of course, and their ammunition belts. But we treated them with great gentleness, and they were given equal rights and equal consideration with the injured of Fidel's own troop. They were settled in the same place, and all the men were given, in fact, when there were only a few cots, the cots were given to injured prisoners that were caught rather than his own or our own men. And that was astonishing to me and very moving.
I don't imagine you'd expect the same treatment if you were captured by anyone from Batista's regime on the way down from the mountain.
No, we would have been killed.
Yeah.
That was the expectation.
Yeah. So this was your day to day. You know, you were expecting to.
It is.
Yeah, and so you were able to make that decision for yourself, and also against the best wishes and intents of your companion Griffin, who worked with educating the folks, you know, and which is a major factor in the Cuban Revolution.
That's right.
And one of the most successful elements, I think, of the Cuban Revolution is the you know, that it's of a 95% plus literacy rate, that education to the community and healthcare, and that is established. And that was what he was set out to accomplish. And how do you feel that message was communicated with the people in Cuba outside of conflict, outside of battle?
As you'd guess, there were a lot of orphans, and that's right, and that's exactly what Griffin was working with the orphans to help them learn, get an education, and teach them. He was very, very good at this. Yeah. I'm sorry, I might have missed your question.
Oh, just I don't know. There's so much to to talk about. I guess that contrast of how do you feel that the revolution was successful in you know what it sought out to accomplish. I know in the book that you talk about and you share time with folks that are farmers and that, you know, have to give everything to the state, I guess, basically. And then Castro saying, well, we're going to do something different. And we're all in this together, so we can do this together and promote education and healthcare and food.
Well, that's right.
Do you think
Fidel's vision was a genuine progressive vision, a deep one, which forbade anything like racism, and just that alone was so huge in Cuba, especially. But he didn't have any of that, and I think we all believed in his principles as he articulated them so well. And I know I did for sure, and still do. That hasn't changed. I think the principles Cuba has set, it's clear why he's so despised by the government of Los Estados Unidos.
And so beloved in, you know, many other places.
In the world, yes.
Yeah, exactly. many other, and that's one of the things that I just have to keep reminding myself is that the rest of the world is welcome to visit Cuba. That we haven't been able to, as United States citizens, to be able to go since, you know, 64 or whatever it was.
No, it's forbidden.
Yeah. But everyone else can go. They welcome, and my experiences there in the early 90s and beyond were very welcoming. You know, it was very, they loved America, they loved the American people, but had problems with the American government. but we're
Well,
very informed and very passionate and
that's
very,
right. I think you said you were there with your wife, right?
yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
how did
she was,
she experience it as a woman?
well, and that's a very, it was a very interesting thing. You know, there's I can't speak for her, so I'm not going to answer that question, but I want to use that question to ask you a question. Because there were so many women that were involved in the revolution and that were, you know, not just supporting, but fighting alongside and really critical elements of, you know, the revolution, Castro's, you know.
That's exactly right. They were combatants. I think of Ida Santa Maria did so much, and Celia Sanchez was absolutely crucial. She was at Fidel's side almost all the time. A few people mistakenly thought that they were lovers, and only metaphysical lovers. They cared so much about one another, but they knew that it was for the revolution. It was all for that. And I was so impressed with Celia all along. And yes, they did. There were probably up to a dozen women combatants that I knew of. Yeah.
And cared for you. You know, and it comes across very, very, very vividly in the book that you probably would not have survived. It's possible you might not have survived without the care, especially in the battle scene when you were wounded.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that was a major altercation. And was it the redhead with the ponytails or the braids? I was like, "Come, you have to come this way," you know. And you know, you were in the thick of it.
That is true.
And then you were seriously wounded in battle. Is there anything else you'd like to share from the book with us right now?
Yeah, there are a couple of segments here I think that are appropriate.
Okay.
In the bohío, at least 8 men were now seated around a table loaded with steaming platters of food. The air was a dense haze of smoke and the mellow conversations of men long accustomed to being together. 4 older women in black dresses scuttled back and forth from the open fires to the table with yet more food. One of the men rose solemnly to his feet and looked around, nodding, then motioned for us to be seated. The women ceased moving. We took 2 places of honor, facing each other from opposite ends of the table. Our host stammered out a few sentences of welcome. As soon as he'd finished, Griffin graciously thanked him in Spanish. The peasants made sounds of approval. Nearly all of them wore little gold crucifixes or saints' medallions on soiled string around their throats or pinned to their shirts. "Caballeros," the host said, setting before Griffin and me small bowls of steaming malanga covered with bits of wild rabbit and shards of steamed greenery. Then the rest of us were seated. "Caballeros, niños, silencio, por favor," resumed the host. The women hushed the children. Everything grew very quiet. Our host solemnly lowered his head and put his hands together as if he was about to say grace. "Viva la revolución," he said. "Viva Fidel Castro." A swift chatter of assent broke from the others. The man on my left struck his wooden spoon sharply against mine. "De acuerdo," he said. "Viva también los periodistas norteamericanos. Viva, que viva." Long live the North American journalists. Nearly all the men nodded enthusiastically at us. Calloused and crusty hands began thrusting at us, heaping plates of yuca and fried slices of platano, followed by bowls of a garlicky bean stew laced with burning rice. For a long moment in the midst of eating, over the smoking spread of mountain food and outstretched arms, Griffin and I paused to look at one another. His eyes were shining. Probably mine were too. You can't hear.
So here it is. It's all happening. You're in the middle of it. You've found yourself in Cuba, in the revolution. What about these? Did you have the idols? Obviously Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, Cienfuegos. These are people that you hope to run across?
They're legendary. Yeah.
Legendary figures. Tell me more.
I never had a conversation or any serious time with Che. He was in a separate group with Raul, Fidel's brother. They were stationed in the Sierra Cristal, and I was in the Sierra Maestra with Fidel. We did come together to mount a joint assault on a fort at one point, and I saw Che, but it was pointed out to me. They said, "There's Che, the great Che from Argentina," and but we didn't have any conversation. I didn't even nod at him. As for you mentioned
Camilo. Camilo.
Yeah, Camilo. Definitely. We did talk. He had worked as a waiter at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City, and we got along well. He spoke fluent English, and we had great conversations.
You could read from you.
Yeah, let me just read this. I sensed a heightened air of anticipation in the cooking shed the next morning. People were moving more vigorously. The first real sign came from Ide, handing us our glasses of coffee, caught my eye, and gave a positive nod. Fresh excitement flooded through me, and I realized what a huge amount of anticipation I'd been carrying. It was early in the afternoon, the sun at its most intense, when we at last saw the thin column of dust rising just beyond a thicket of coffee trees. We watched them approach, a file of some 30 men moving briskly uphill, hiking roughly 2 abreast, accompanied by several heavily loaded mules. At the head of the file, climbing with a powerful stride, despite an immense backpack, was Fidel, taller and paler than I'd expected. Except for the eyeglasses, he looked like one of El Greco's patriarchs, that long bearded face with dark eyebrows and a profound expression of unfaltering earnestness. Rugged and muscular in baggy olive khakis covered with dust, he was carrying a rifle with a telescopic sight. Beside him strode a short, wiry woman, surprisingly small, yet managing to keep pace with him. We soon learned this was Celia Sanchez.
Oh, wonderful.
You could read the one on Camilo.
Thank you.
Let me read this one about Camilo.
Thank you.
Our mules were jogging along side by side. He was holding my arm, keeping me balanced. As he talked, his grip tightened. Believe me, he went on, this revolution isn't about any mere change in government. It's born out of belief that all men have immense possibilities for building, for creating. This isn't just a political coup. Please understand that. I nodded. I was hating the dizziness, the disgusting weakness that made a buzzing confusion of his earnest voice. The sun was too powerful for me. I strained to comprehend what he was saying, but wave after wave of dizzying heat pounded against my head. I was barely awake when we arrived at the rundown ranch where we were to spend the night. Soon the doctor and I were being ushered into the ranch house by their leader, a great shaggy bear of a man introduced to me as Camilo Cienfuegos. He and the doctor seemed very fond of one another. Throwing his tremendous arms around the two of us, Cienfuegos took us on a tour of the ranch. In a ramshackle building that looked like a deserted small barn, there was the rebel equivalent of a munitions factory. At least 6 men were inside. Some were using blowtorches to shape thin sheets of steel. Others were measuring out powder allotments. behind an old-fashioned forge, a fire was being started. The heat in the barn was staggering. Looking exactly like a blacksmith, Cienfuegos motioned toward several stacks of mortar shells and rifle grenades piled to an impressive height against one wall. Resourceful, isn't it? The doctor said with obvious pride. About a fifth of all the bombs dropped in the Sierra are duds. As we find them, they're dug up and brought here, where they're taken apart and made into our kind of weapons.
Yeah.
Punto.
Okay, I just have to ask. I hate to put you on the spot, but what do you think happened to Comandante Cienfuegos on the flight? His disappearance. Do you have any sense of when he died? You know, he disappeared.
I know. I don't know what the story is. I've heard several versions, several stories about what most likely happened. I don't know, and I'm hesitant to believe any one because they're quite different.
Yeah, it's such an enigma. So you found your way down from the mountains with that aid of all of these, you know, these are now your brothers, your sisters, you know, you're part of it all. And you have to leave and you come back to the United States. And this is not covered in Wild Green Oranges. You know, the best sense I can get out of it at the end is that you make it down and you make it out. You're on the plane, you're on the way home. Congratulations. What came next for you? How did you possibly write this book? Weren't you concerned? Weren't you worried of the repercussions?
Well, I did have my passport taken away from me until about a year after it was seized by the government, US government. It was determined that Fidel Castro was not the leader of a country, of a foreign country. He was against the leader of that foreign country, who was, of course, Batista. And so my passport was handed back to me. I determined at that point that I would work only at progressive causes and such as bookstores or Kpfa radio. And
Yeah, well,
that was going to be my fate. That's what I believed in, and that's what I would stay with.
no, that's I felt like I was led down the same path myself as a 30 plus year long used bookseller, an independent bookseller. And I know that you came back from Cuba in the late 50s and moved to Berkeley, I guess, and worked with Mo at Mo's.
Yeah, I worked at Mo's for probably 30 years. And then with a friend, I opened another store called Black Oak Books, which survived for a while.
Very familiar with both of them. Mo's bookstore was instrumental with, I know the underground comic movement was one of the very first places you could get right. Those sorts of, you know, there were major distributors for, you know, I guess that not quite radical literature, but so that was really, you made that decision and you stuck with it. Yeah. From Cuba, and that really did resonate with you. Do you feel that was, where did you feel that really was drawn from? What resonated so strongly with you that you would change the rest of the course of your life to hold those values dear?
The principles of the 26th of July movement, well, quite simply, having a progressive vision and maintaining it, and going up against racism and other capitalist bad habits.
Very well put, sir. I would like to open this up to questions. We have a lot of questions from the folks in attendance this evening. Is there any last bit of an excerpt or a bit of writing that you would like to share with us before we can open?
No, I say let's democratize this, open it up.
All right. Well, thank you again for everything, and really congratulations on such a gripping and extraordinarily readable effort. It has all of the elements of the great coming of age novels.
I thank you, Kevin. I heartily thank you. You've done a wonderful job with this, and I appreciate your appreciation.
Thank you, sir. I only wish that I was still a bookseller, because this is exactly the kind of book that I would love to put in almost everybody's hand that would come through that door and say, "Oh,
Well,
you need something next? Try this."
You might want to consider changing your occupation.
Oh yeah, go back. Well, we'll see. Maybe some years down the road. I do want to mention to everyone that the Wild Green Oranges is available at bookshop.org. And that is a wonderful independent source for online purchasing. This book is published by the Clapton Press, which is a European press that focuses on Spanish Civil War literature.
That's right.
Something like that.
It's an English press based in London. I didn't believe, and still don't believe, any American publisher would publish this book.
I'm amazed. Yeah, I am truly amazed that it did get published, because this is the real deal. This is gritty. This is raw, and these are the true experiences that I'm surprised that it could be published today. So speaking of that, curious about how it came to be when you arrived in Cuba that Bob and Griffin were trusted by Fidel and the revolutionaries. That's one of our guests this evening asked. How did that come to pass? You know?
Well, Fidel had, in his youth, as a late teenager, had already experienced, had fought in two other revolutions. One in Puerto Rico, and I think in Bolivia. He had gone there and fought. He believed that revolution was a universal and international affair, and he had no difficulty accepting us whatsoever. There were probably some our fellow combatants who were a little hesitant just because we were Norte Americanos, and but I think they, in my sense of it was that in time they got accustomed to us and became friendly.
It felt good, huh? Somebody like, hey, we got somebody from there on our side now. Do you feel like there was any of that moment?
Maybe so. Maybe so.
Yeah, that's great. We have a lot of folks that are just really inspired. A lot of comments about those lines. But speaking of inspiration, an anonymous attendee this evening asked, what inspired the title Wild Green Oranges? It is kind of unique.
It is, and it's maybe perplexing. Within the book, it's explained. There's a short section about standing with Fidel when he pulls a little handful of wild green oranges off a tree, and standing there, and they're smaller than most oranges, and they're almost volatile in their flavor. It's so explosive. It's bitter and nasty, and it just struck me that was similar to a quality needed.
That's neat. Yeah, and I remember, vividly you two tossing them back and forth with each other like pelota. Yeah, that's really neat. It's a beautiful moment in the book. So Karen asks that you were there in 58, 59. What other third world revolutionary struggles were you aware of and inspired by?
None.
That
I wasn't very knowledgeable. This is the one that I gave myself to heartily when I was young and stayed with it for quite a while. I subsequently, after coming back to this country, I worked with the Cuban consulate in Paris, interviewing people who spoke English from England, from Belgium, from many places, who were interested to go to Cuba. And my job was to ascertain that they had skills that would be useful to the revolution, not just ideology. So I hope that answers.
Okay. So I was something that kind of, crossed my mind as well, 10 years down the road with, what's happening in Southeast Asia and, Ho Chi Minh. It was, a comparable figure or someone to inspire you as well, or how do you?
Probably, but I'm really hesitant, Kevin, really hesitant to comment on that because I don't know very much about it.
Of course.
It's not something I'm really familiar with, but certainly Ho Chi Minh, we shall win.
Yeah, there you go. So what happened to Griffin? Barbara asks, after you returned from Cuba, were you ever in touch with him? Did you stay close?
We didn't stay close. He traveled somewhat and has subsequently died.
Okay. Yeah, I suppose that does tend to happen. Is there a second volume of your historical autobiography coming out? Are you working on anything these days?
There will not be a second volume. No, this is it.
And so why did you wait to tell this story now?
I didn't. I told the story about almost 60 years ago in a manuscript, less mature, I think, than this one. This has been rewritten. That manuscript was accepted by a publisher, G.P. Putnam Sons and Sons. Their editor, Peter Israel, accepted it, and it was only later that Walter Mitten, the president of G.P. Putnam and Sons, turned it down. And as Peter Israel said to me, I would put my job on the line for this, but it would only mean losing my job. So that's it. It didn't get, I had ample time to rethink, and with the help of my wife, Kathleen Weaver, go over it and rewrite it.
And you did that somewhat recently?
Well, it took some time, but yes, over the last couple of years.
Yeah. Okay. And a very good question from Russ that asks, if you were in your early 20s now, what cause would you be attracted to?
Well, I think some of the ones that I am attracted to, which is fighting racism wherever possible. That seems to me to be absolutely key in this country. Yeah. Other causes, I don't think. Well, racism is an international cause, of course, but I don't know how more broadly I would want to speak to that. Yeah,
I understand. That's crucial, of course. Do you see the revolution continuing in Cuba? How do you feel it's progressing these days?
I feel it's a great thing. If it weren't for the hardened, unrelenting opposition of the United States, who knows where that would be? They're managing to survive, to get along, but with, well, you know well, what the treatment by the United States has cost them. At least I think you must know.
Oh, indeed.
Yeah.
Oh, of course. No, it's crushing. It really is. The Helms-Burton Act is just insult to injury, and it's inexcusable.
But I think it has afforded Cuba itself, or Cubans, increased poverty, but such a strong sense of pride that they've gone up against the monster and maintaining, and are maintaining, for all that costs them.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the best days of my life was spent on the Playa Giron, the Bay of Pigs. We were on the beach. My wife and I were, 2 weeks into our trip there, and it had been a whirlwind. Havana is chaotic, and so we here, there, the other place, and we just really needed a beach day. And we were on the beach, and then there were three fishermen that came out of the beach, spear fishermen, and they just had a small catch that day. And we said, they were kind of disappointed they wouldn't have much to sell to the restaurants or to the state stores, for things. So their day of work was to not so much. And I said, well, it looks like there's plenty enough for all of us. Let's have a barbecue, right? So yeah. We did. They said that's a great idea. And then we had to scatter and go to everybody. I swear was everyone in that community, all the different homes, because we had to get potatoes from one place, we had to get coal from another place, we had to get ice. And if somebody didn't have ice, then of course 5 people had to gather together and run all around everywhere to try to find his ice for this, for that, for the other thing. And just the spirit of camaraderie and everybody working together to make sure that a couple of Yankees, my wife and myself, down there, and the place where they turn back the eagle of imperialism, is the point of the greatest pride of that country, and that they just fell over backwards to try to make it as comfortable and enjoyable and
what a terrific experience, man.
Oh, I just loved it. Every moment I spent there was, it's challenging. And I think a lot of the same problems exist from when you were there. It is sort of like a time capsule, but it is a very beautiful place, and I really do hope that all of us get to experience it. Do you think a revolution? And this would be a good one to go out on. Thank you again so much for all of your time, Bob. Do you think a revolution is possible and can happen here in the United States?
My instinctive response is not a prayer.
Yeah.
I don't think so. Others would know more about it, who, particularly anyone who is engaged in that. But I doubt it. Not in the foreseeable.
Yeah.
Too bad.
I want to thank you. Yeah, well, or maybe it's happening from the other side, and we gotta, hitch up our trousers and get back out there and fend off a different sort of a revolution. Right. We got to defend what's right for us too. Thank you, Bob Baldock. You are truly an inspiration. I can't thank you enough for the foundation that you've laid at Kpfa, and what you've shared with all of us, what you worked so hard to do, to communicate, to be that funnel for all of the goodness that's in the world.
Well, back at you, Kevin, and in spades, heartily so.
Yeah. Thank you again, sir. I want to just remind everyone that Wild Green Oranges is available at bookshop.org. We have links to that in our chat, and we'll have this reposted and resent to you all, as a keepsake, as a link. But please, if you have any questions or you'd like to follow up, events at kpfa.org, and visit kpfa.org. Make a donation today to help keep these
and
things
going. They can go also to, folks can go to bobbaldock.com. My website to check it out further.
Thank you for mentioning that. You have an extraordinary archive of the beautiful visual art that you've done. We didn't have a chance to talk about that tonight. I wanted to address that. You're an extraordinarily talented visual artist. You designed the cover for Wild Green Oranges and all of the posters that KPFA has used over all these years. And bobbaldock.com has an extraordinary archive of all of those images. So yes, great point. Please do that. Thank you, Bob. I'm really so happy to have been able to work with you. And I'm so happy for all of the recipients of the Bob Baldock Fund for, creative journalism, creative pursuits for the booksellers that will be coming. That is that's a really inspiring fund and will do a lot of good for a lot of people down the road. So I'm thrilled to be able to thank you in that manner, and KPFA will keep that going for a long while.
A privilege to converse with you, Kevin.
Thank you, sir. Have a great night, and thank you all for joining us. This has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you again. Have a great night.
Thank you.